What is the limit of the punishment that men can inflict on each other? On the morning of the 5th of April, 1531, the sky over London was ashen grey, and the city was shrouded in an eerie silence, as if nature itself were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. In Smithfield, a place that had seen bloody executions and crowded markets, something unusual awaited. In the middle of the square, a huge bronze cauldron was set alight, its light reflecting ominously off the dark bronze walls. Sparks crackled as steam rose, a hazy veil of horror. When the guards dragged out a bound man, the crowd fell silent. It was Richard Roose, a cook in the employ of Bishop John Fisher. But today he had not come to cook. He had come to be cooked. His face was white with terror, his eyes fixed on the boiling cauldron, as if he still could not believe that he himself would become a victim of a punishment that has almost been forgotten in human memory. An ordinary man, an unnoticed profession. So what made him the target of a death reserved for traitors to the throne? And what made the authorities choose such a cruel way of execution? To understand the origins of this terrible tragedy, one must trace back to February 1531, when England was shaken by a power earthquake. King Henry VIII, with absolute determination, an ordinary man, an unnoticed profession. So what made him the target of a death? The decision was like a slash that tore the country in two. On one side were opportunistic courtiers who applauded the king's ambition. On the other were loyal clergy who defended the view that marriage was sacred and inalienable. Joan was born in 1326 into an ambitious royal family, the daughter of Charles, Duke of Calabria, and the granddaughter of Robert of Naples, a king who was praised for his wisdom but who also set out on a perilous path for his granddaughter. The Kingdom of Naples was not only wealthy, but also a strategic bridge between Christian Europe and the Muslim world along the Mediterranean. He lived in fear, but as time would prove, it was not an illusion but a chillingly accurate survival intuition. Neither the sword nor the prison, a bowl of soup became the murder weapon in a bishop's mansion. In Lambeth, South London, Bishop Fisher's residence was always attended by a devoted team of servants. Among them was Richard Roose, a middle-aged, inconspicuous cook who had never attracted attention until the fateful afternoon of the 18th of February. That afternoon, Fisher held a small banquet. The main course was thick soup, a popular dish of the time. Roose prepared the broth as usual, but this time he secretly added a powder. When questioned, he said it was only a laxative, a crude joke, not intended to harm anyone. Fisher ate very little, not out of suspicion, but because he had no appetite. The rest ate more. According to custom, the leftovers from the banquet were sent to the poor. Bennet Kirwan and Alice Trippitt, two humble beggars, received the hot soup and could not hide their joy. But by evening, terror had set in. Those who had eaten began to suffer stomach cramps, vomiting and convulsions. Fisher was lucky to escape. Some became seriously ill, but Bennet and Alice did not survive. Their bodies were discovered the next morning, their faces twisted, having died in excruciating pain. The story of the poisoning quickly spread like wildfire through London. The news spread like a thunderbolt. Lawrence, heart-heavy, rushed to the scene to find his spiritual father. According to tradition, he wept and cried out as he watched Sixtus being led away. The suspect, Richard Roose, was arrested as he tried to leave the city. He was then imprisoned in the Tower of London and tortured with a rack, an X-shaped interrogation device where the victim's limbs were stretched to the point of near severity. In agony, Roose confessed to having put a powder in the soup, but insisted that he had no idea it was a deadly poison and had thought it was just a digestive upset. What was shocking was that the whole affair did not go following the usual legal process. On the 28th of February, Henry VIII himself appeared before Parliament in an extremely rare event to declare the poisoning an act of treason. Parliament quickly passed Act 22, Henry VIII, Chapter 9, defining poisoning as treason and fixing the penalty, to be boiled alive. The truth is chilling. Henry VIII not only sentenced Rose without a proper trial, but also enacted a retroactive law that created a kind of justice forged in the hotbed of politics. Poisoning was now considered equal to treason, and the punishment had to be proportionate: hanging until nearly dead, castration, disembowelment, quartering, all while the victim was conscious enough to feel the cuts. But the king was not satisfied. He wanted a punishment that would evoke the deepest horror: cooking alive, to prolong the death, to let the fire drain the veins, to make the screams a deterrent. The question is, why? Fisher was no ally, Rose was just a cook. So what made Henry come forward to participate as if he were the victim? No one knows for sure. Some historians say the king had a deep fear of poison, a death that was silent, dirty, unworthy even of an enemy. Others suspect it was a move to cover up the traces. Ambassador Eustace Chapuis, Fisher's close friend and protector of Queen Catherine, wrote that Henry wanted to quell rumors that he, or Anne Boleyn and her family, had hired Rose to murder Fisher. Rumors spread fast, too fast. And sometimes the best way to silence suspicion is to throw the suspect into a cauldron of boiling water. Whatever the truth, Richard Rose's fate was sealed with hot iron. He was executed on the 5th of April, 1531. It was a strange morning, when all of London seemed to stop to watch a public torture. Smithfield was packed with men, women, children, all jostling for a better view. Cake sellers, wine sellers, the atmosphere was like a fair, not a place where a man was about to be boiled to death. The huge copper cauldron had been boiling for a long time. Rumor had it that Rose had been given strong wine, not to comfort him, but to keep him still. Guards stripped him of his clothes. A priest quietly read absolution, but no words for the body about to be burned. The first time, only his feet sank. Screams rent the air as the blistered skin split from the flesh. People covered their ears, some fainted. The second time, water boiling, embracing his entire body, his screams turned into a gurgling sound, as if his throat had melted. The water changed from clear to pale red, then darker. For the last time, his body disappeared completely in the cauldron. No more sound, no more form. Only the smell of smoke and flesh, clinging to the clothes, hair, and memories of all who were present that day. Death, however slow and brutal, finally released him from the fire of man. Richard Rose's death was not the only gruesome exception. The new law, which Henry VIII himself had pushed through, quickly became the official punishment for anyone convicted of poisoning. In 1542, a woman named Margaret Davies was boiled alive at Smithfield herself, accused of murdering 3 families where she had worked as a servant. The fire beneath the copper cauldron seemed to have become the voice of the throne, silent but burning more than any sentence. It was not until the reign of Henry's son Edward VI that this barbaric form of execution was abolished as part of a series of reforms that limited the most brutal acts of the law. But what made Rose's case all the more terrifying was not the manner of his death, but the political undercurrents that swirled beneath the surface. Rose was not just a man accused of being a pawn in a game of power as England prepared for a period of violent religious transformation. John Fisher, the target of his poisoning 4 years later, would also meet a bloody end: blood. For refusing to acknowledge Henry as Supreme Pontiff of England, he was beheaded in 1535. His head was hung from London Bridge to rot, then replaced by that of Thomas More, another intellectual who refused to submit to the crown. Even Anne Boleyn, the woman who had benefited from Fisher's downfall, was not immune to fate. Less than 5 years later, she was executed for treason, adultery, and incest, all of which were likely just an excuse for Henry to marry Jane Seymour. And Henry? He continued for another 16 years, 4 more wives, and a reign steeped in blood, betrayal, and religion manipulated to its core. Today, amid the glass high-rises and the hustle and bustle, Richard Rose is not remembered. No stone tablet, no monument, Not a trace remains to remind us that in Smithfield itself, a man was boiled to death in a copper cauldron for an act that to this day no one has been able to prove whether it was intentional or stupid. We might think that this is just a past chapter in the thick book of British history. But is it really closed? If the story were merely a story of one man's pain, it would have been forgotten. Instead, it lives on as a silent reminder that justice can be bent in the hands of the powerful, that the law, if left unchecked, can become a legalized weapon. And that humiliation, when dressed as justice, can be cheered by a whole crowd. Some said she had been strangled with a pillow. Others swore it was a silk cord, as fate had repaid the death she had bestowed on Andrew. Either way, Joan I, Queen of Naples, died in the dark, without prayers, without candlelight. Rose's death was not just the end of a life. It was living proof of an age where morality is not the foundation of justice, but only the fragile mask of fear and ambition. And if today we think we have come a long way, that modern society has shaken off the new forms of boiling water, perhaps the scariest thing is we no longer hear the screams, not because they do not exist, but because they are drowned out by the noise of familiarity. And perhaps the question is no longer, how long has it been? But is it really over?